All right. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Avodah Zara Daf Tes Vav. We're starting at the bottom of Yudalad and Beis at a Mishnah, and we'll be wrapping up to the two dots at the top of Tes Zayin Amud Aleph. That's where we'll pick up on Shabbos. I'm out of town Sunday through Thursday. I've texted Rabbi Handler to sub for me, waiting to hear back from him. I only texted him 5 minutes ago. It's not like it's been a while. But Amir Hashem will hear back from him soon. I could ask my brother too, but it doesn't. I'll go. Just the same. Let's jump in. The Mishnah says at the bottom of Yud Daled and Beis as follows. Let's make sure I'm recording this time. There you go. Makom shenagu limkor behema daka laovdei kochavim mochen. In a particular city, if there is in fact a minhag to sell a behema daka, these are smaller animals like sheeps, those kind of animal, goats. So then that's considered permissible. Makom shenagu shelo limkor. But if you're in a particular city where the minhag is not to sell a behema daka, so then the halacha is ein mochrin. Uvechol makom, no matter what city you're in, ein mochrin lehem behema gasa. You're not allowed to sell larger animals. That's definitely going to be problematic. Rashi, 2/3 of the way down. So that means that if you, in our modern parlance, we might want to say, can you sell a car to a guy who's going to drive on Shabbos? Can you sell a behema gasa to an animal? These are like shilas. They're saying like the way that the Mishnah plays out in modern day is if I'm a car salesman and I sell a car to someone who I know is going to violate Shabbos. So the Gemara here says, if I sell a behema gasa, so that's aser, ein mochel behema gasa. Also, agala musyachim, which are calves and colts. These are animals that will grow into behemos gasa, but for right now, they're just smaller. It's like a cub compared to a bear. It doesn't mean that it isn't a bear. It just means that it hasn't grown to full size yet. And as well, shleimim mushvurim, that's also going to be problematic in the world of behema gasa, whether or not they are complete animals and whether or not they are broken animals. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shvura, he allows that because that animal can't work l'chora. Remember, our concern that Rashi highlighted was that if I'm a yid and I sell a goy a behema gasa, we're afraid of malacha and Shabbos. I have a din of shvisas behemto. It's usher for me, for my animals, for my properties to do malacha on Shabbos. But if it's a shvura, I don't have to worry about it working on Shabbos. Uben b'seira matir b'sus. He allows the selling of an animal. Rashi, why is he matir b'sus? Rashi says, matir b'sus she'ein malachto ela l'rechiva, u'rechiva shvusu v'lav malacha. Mishum dechai noseis atzmo. The din of chai noseis atzmo is a fascinating din. In our modern parlance, in our modern halachic observance, chai noseis atzmo comes up in the world of hilchos and nida. When a woman is in nida and the husband and wife want to pass a baby to one another. So if the baby's a newborn, so I spoke to Rabbi first about this, that's not chai noseis atzmo. He has no muscle control at all. He has no control at all. He doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't know where he is, doesn't know who's holding him, doesn't know an aleph from a base, doesn't know anything. But once the child is able to lunge toward the parent, however old that is, 6, 7, 8, 9 months, whatever the age is, that's when we have the din of chai noseis atzmo. So when a couple is benida, we don't hand things to one another based on this din. Once they're chai noseis atzmo, then you can pass to one another. Anyways, that's why he says this. That's what Rashi says. He's talking about v'lav malacha mishum dechai noseis atzmo, the animal's walking itself. Let's pick up with the Gemara. The fact that our Mishnah opened in regards to a behema daka, that seemingly is just dependent on minhag hamakom. If you live in West Rogers Park, you can sell a behema daka. If you live in Skokie, you can't. That's what it seems like, just whatever the city's customs are. But the Gemara has a problem with that. L'meimra, it seems to be that what you're saying in regards to a behema daka is the isura leka. There is no fundamental isur in selling a behema daka. Minhago hu deika, and there's only a minhag. Therefore, hecha denoig isura nahug, hecha denoig heter nahug. It's really just purely minhag dependent. But that's a problem, says the Gemara. 4 lines from the bottom of Yadal and Beis. Or mini, we have a brisa that seems to not say like this. The brisa says, "Ein ma'amidin behema." We're not allowed to allow our animals to stay bepundako shel ovdei kochavin mibnei shechshudin ala revia. If we have an animal seemingly of any size, behema gasa or behema daka, that's what it seems like from the Gemara, you're not allowed to leave them out in the open by avodas kochavim. They were chashud on revia, on sodomy of animals, of bestiality. Now these things happen because of behaviors. It wasn't like halacha demands we assume this of them. As we'll soon see, we don't assume it of everybody, but there was some chevra that was really chashud al revia. So what do we see from here? You can't just sell a behemoth daka to a goy because they're chashud al revia. That's what the brisa says. This brisa, which is also quoted later on. So therefore, how can our Mishnah say that it's seemingly minhag makom, whereas the Brisa seems to say that they're chashud ala ravia lechoretz lifnei iver lo sitein michshal? You're not allowed to do that. You can't free up an animal. You can't, you just like imagine you go to a saloon, like right back in the day, you take your animal and you tie the reins up so the animal doesn't run away. You can't do that. Why? Because they're chashud ala ravia. So what is it? Is it a minhag that we don't sell, or is it halacha? So Amar Rav, makom sheitiru limkor hitiru liyachi. What we're talking about is when we're in a place where we see that there's a heter to sell, that's a place where hitiru liyachid, where we allow a non-Jew to be alone, an akum really, to be alone with an animal. Namely, they're not chashud ala ravia. So let's say in city Ploni, they're not chashud ala ravia. There you're allowed to sell behemoth daka if that's the minhag makov. But in city Almoni, so there, if there are people there chashud ala ravia, then you're not allowed to sell behemoth daka. That's mamish asr, and that's the distinction. And makam she'asr liachid asr limkor. That's the distinction. It really just depends on what the tendencies are, what the proclivities are in those particular cities. Top of Tesvav Amud Aleph. So that's answer number one that we got from Rav, that we are in some cases concerned about revia, in some cases not. Rabbi Elazar Omer. Even in a city where we don't allow for an akum to be alone with an animal, namely where chashud ala ravia, still mutter, or really the language should be hitiru, which aligns with the previous language, hitiru limkor. I don't care if it's a city where they're chashud ala ravia. I'm still allowed to sell a behemoth daka according to Belazar. Why? My tama. Oved kochavim chas al behemto shelo te'aker. An Oved Kochavim, when he buys an animal, he will not be roveya his own animal because it can lead to some type of sterility in that animal. So he would not do that. He just wouldn't do that to his own animal. We would be concerned about other people's animals, taka, but his own animal, we would not be choshesh. Now, so that means that we see that there's a machlokes between Rav and Rebbe Lazar about whether or not we assume that certain akum are chashud ala ravia. So then says the Gemara, "Ve'af Rav hadarbe." Even Rav, who just a few lines ago posited that we are concerned about chashud ala ravia, he was hadarbe as well. Do Amar Rav Tachlifa, Amar Rav Shila bar Avimi, Mishmei de Rav, Oved Kochavim chasal behemto shelo te'aker. So now we see that really Rav and Rebbe Lazar seem to agree. Historically interesting because Rebbe Lazar lived after Rav. So Rav had, in his lifetime, he had his own dialogue about this. He started out saying they're chashud ala ravia, and then he said, "No, so I think my previous psak is wrong. They're chasal behemto shelo te'aker." So now there's no machlokes anymore, and what that means is that we no longer have a concern about chashud ala ravia. Even if they are chashud ala ravia, I'm still allowed to sell them a behemoth daka. Why? Because they are chasal behemto shelo te'aker. So no machlokes anymore. At the 2.6 lines down, v'chol makom. No, what about Bilam? Yeah, we just. The question is not. Does anybody ever sleep with there? That's not the question. In many ways, but we're not asking, has anyone ever cohabited with their own animal? We're asking the halachic threshold, if I sell this to someone as chashud ala ravia, what is the baseline? The baseline is that they're chas al mamono, that they're not going to do that because then their animal could become sterile. There are exceptions. It's a great example because it came up in just now. We just had it recently. It was this Masechta, no? So, but yeah, again, we never make rules based on the exceptions. We make them based on the trends. And the halachic assumption is what Rebbe Lazar, and then subsequently what Rav came around to agree with, is that chas al behemto shelo te'aker, that people won't cohabit with their own animals because it could make them sterile. That's still, nevertheless, a great question. I wonder if the Rishonim talk about that. So it says the Gemara, V'chol makom ein mochrin behema gasa. We said that still, no matter what happens, whether or not your city is a place that allows the selling of a behema daka or not, but when it comes to behema gasa, it's completely asur. My taima. Nihidil revia lo chayshinan. I agree that we're not concerned about revia. Why not? Because of what we just learned, that people are the oved kochav mischas al behemto shelo ta'aker. So we're not choshesh that he'll cohabit with the behema gasa, but rather ma'avid bei malacha, and there should be another word here, bishabis chayshinan. We are concerned that if I sell a behema gasa to an akum, that he will use that animal on Shabbos. Says the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Michael's question. V'nei avid, let him go do whatever he wants with the animal. Kevan dezavna kanya. Once I sell the animal to the guy, it's not my problem what he does with the animal. Shvisas behemto is a din in me and my animals. But if I sell you an animal, quote unquote, with the title, that's not my animal anymore. So what's the problem? So says the Gemara, you're 100% right. If I sell an animal to a guy, it is not really a problem. But Zara, we have a rabbinic injunction, mishum she'ela umishum schirus. We're concerned that in a case of she'ela, of me lending, a case of schirus, where you rent from me, in those cases, we're concerned about my shvisas behemto. So let's just paint the two pictures. So we have a guy, and the guy says, Phil, can you please sell me a behema gasa? And I sell behemos gasa for a living. Absolutely. Here's a cow, $10,000. He pays me, I give him the animal. Midorais have done nothing wrong, even if that animal just plows all Shabbos long. But the Chachamim came along and said, hold on. It's too similar to she'ela and to schirus. So if somebody says, can I borrow your animal on Friday afternoon? I'll give him back Saturday night. And then he plows those. That is shvisas behemto. And even though it's true that selling an animal's mutter, but midrabanan, we don't allow selling of a behema gasa to an akum, because in the case of shoel and schirus, that is my liability, because that's my shvisas behemto. You're the one who rented. Yeah, but it's mine. It's mine. Problem is, the Gemara says that's not true. The Gemara says, wait 1 second. She'ela kanya, the akra kanya. The Gemara says that when I am mash'il a behema gasa to you, so then for now it's yours. And when I do schirus with you, for now it's yours. So says the Gemara, we accept that too, which means that now selling a behema gasa midoraisa is not a problem. The gzera we were concerned about in regards to shoel and schirus is also not a problem. All of that is mutter, which means I can be mashil, I can be socher, and I can sell. No problem. So what then is the concern of our Mishnah that says that we're not allowed to sell a behema gasa to an akum? So says the Gemara, Ela Amar Rami Berei de Rav Yeva, Gzera Mishum Nisyoni. The Gzera is when the goy is testing out whether or not the animal is taking for a spin. It's test drive, exactly. So says the Gemara, Dezimnin dezavna leine hale samach l'shkias achama, demale shabsa. Let's say the case scenario is I'm trying to sell you this animal on Erev Shabbos. We're going through the sale process, and it's time for the test drive. So we get this donkey, cow, whatever I'm selling you, behema gasa, and I put all the packages on there, and then I, the owner, say, Amarle, ta, nasye nehale. I say to the buyer, let's test out the animal. The problem is that we know that Pavlovian conditioning is a real thing. And the owner's voice is recognizable to the animal. The shamale lekale, the animal hears the owner's voice, and then va'azla machmase, and then because of the voice of the owner, who's a yid, the owner, the seller is a yid, v'nichale de tezel, and it's melechesh machsheves. I'm the Yisrael. I'm selling this behema gasa to. I want this animal to walk. V'havale mechamar achar behemto b'Shabbos. So the Gemara says, this seems to be a stretch. Why can you not sell an animal to a goy? So says the Gemara, we're concerned that if you sell it too close to Shkias Achama, and if you're testing it with the goy, and the Yid says, go test this now, it's 2 minutes before Shkia, so then the animal is going to start walking because of the voice of the owner, and that's Mechamer Achar Behemto B'Shabbos. Very far-fetched, very far away, but the Chachamim were Choshesh. And the Gemara seems to accept this as a reasonable concern as to why we have a Gzera not to sell a Behema Gasa to an Akum.
Isn't there a Mishnah in Shabbos that says you're not allowed to do a business after Mincha Gidol or Mincha Katana anyway?
Which doesn't mean you're not going.
First of all, he hasn't sold it yet. Right? Once the animal stands up, again, there's a point, a moment in time when the sale happens. There are things like that. Those Mishnayos talk about not going on a trip on Shabbos on a boat. All of those, yeah. I don't remember the specific Mishnah you're talking about, but I'm somewhat familiar with it, and I'm sure it's a very good question in regards to comparative analysis. Like you should see if there's Tosfosim that discuss that. That would be a perfect. But I don't know the good answer to that. The next line is actually taken out. It does say that is subject to a discussion, and Rashi seemingly does not have that script. Okay, so we've tried to unpack a little bit. We've learned a little bit about the Behema Daka, and we just finished learning a little bit about the Behema Gasa, about our concern about Nisioni. Let's ask a couple of questions on that. A third of the way down on Tes Vav Amud Aleph. Maskiv lo Rav Shisha b'rei de Rav Idi v'schirus mikanya. You wanted to say that schirus was kanya, and because schirus is kanya, so then if I rent to you, then whatever happens with the animal in your property is not my problem. But the Gemara says schir is not necessarily kona, and I'll prove it to you. V'atnan. Even when one is allowed to rent to a goy, lo lebeis dira amru, not to his house, mipnei shemachnis lesocho avodas kochavim. Because if I rent to you and I rent to a goy, so then the goy, if he's an avodas kochavim mazalos, he's going to bring his deities into the house. So what does that show you about my ownership? If I'm the landlord, I have to ask on the intake form, do you worship idols? Because if I own and you rent, seemingly that's my problem. And says the Gemara, V'isal kadaitach schirus kanya. If you want to say that renting is actually a kinyan, then this guy, the renter who lives in apartment 3B, Kikama'ayel, when he brings in some Avodah Zara to his house, what do I care? Lebese Kama'ayel. It's not my problem. Elamaya must be that Schirus is not Kona. And if Schirus is not Kona, then we should be concerned about selling a Behema Gasa to a Goy. Not selling, renting a Behema Gasa to a Goy. Because Schirus is not Kona. And if I rent it to him and he does Malacha on Shabbos, it's a violation of my Shvisas Behemto. So says the Gemara, hold on, shiny avodas kochavim dechamira. In general, we hold schirus as kanya. But when it comes to avodah zara, we have a next level of concern. We've kicked it up a notch. And even though in general schirus is kanya, but when I'm renting to an akum, because avodas kochavim is chamira, so therefore we still say that there's an iser derabanan to do so. Dichsi v'lo savi toeva el beisecha. Okay, question and answer. We're still doing okay because that means that with our sugya, we still hold that schirus is kanya. Just by avodas kochavim, it's not kona. So says the Gemara about 2/3 of the way down. Maskif lo Rav Yitzchak b'rei Rav Mesharsha. Let's flip it the other way. The schirus mi kanya. Do we say that schirus is kona? We're pressure testing now. Whenever you see the Gemara doing this, we're pressure testing. We go to each extreme. First we said, v'schirus lo kanya. I'll show you. Now it says, v'schirus mi kanya. Actually, no, it's the same question. They're both v'schirus mi kanya. Let me be more clear. So they're both asking the same question again. Do we say that schirus is kona? V'hatnan. Yisrael shesachar para mekohen. A Yisrael who rents a cow from a kohen. What is the Yisrael, who's not allowed to eat truma, allowed to give the para that belongs to a kohen? Yachilena karshine truma. He's allowed to give animal feed that is, in fact, truma. What about the reverse? The kohen shesachar para mi Yisrael. If there's a kohen who rents a para from a Yisrael, so the kohen's allowed to eat truma, but the animal belongs to a Yisrael, Afal pisha mizonose alav. Even though the Kohen is on the hook to feed that animal, lo yachilena karshine truma, you're not allowed to feed that. Now, v'isal kedaitach siros kanya, my lo yachilena. If you want to say that renting is a kinyan, then in both directions, if the animal is under the guide, under the ownership, the temporary ownership, the rental ownership of a Kohen, then afal pi that it belongs to Israel, you should be able to feed it karshine truma. Yet we see that that's not the case. Amailo yachilena, para didehi, it's his para. Eloshma mina, schirus lo kanya. What we see from here is that schirus is in fact not kona to the other person. And now that we know that schirus is not kona, now we have a broader explanation of what the gzera derabanan is about behema gasa. And here's what it is. 8 lines from the bottom. Gzera mishum schirus, v'gzera mishum she'ela, v'gzera mishum misyoni. We have the triple concern about renting, about lending, and about doing the test drive with the animal. In all of those cases, we are concerned, and therefore we are never allowed to sell a behema gasa to a goy. I'm asking, I don't know. Can I sell a car to a goy?
Why not?
Gzeira mishum she'ela. If it's a lease,
Technically, it's not to a goy, it's to an akum, right?
we're talking about an akum, someone who's going to, no, this is about Hilchos Shabbos.
This is.
Hilchos Shabbos.
Well, my voice, but generally speaking, it doesn't.
Let's assume it was a malacha d'oraisa, a car with combustion. Yeah.
It doesn't go by voice.
So you've removed the nisyoni. That's fine. But what if you lease?
Even if, right?
That's nisyoni. Yeah.
Test drive is okay. What was the problem? Not that he's test driving it, but when you say give it a shot, your animal hears your voice because you're the owner.
Correct.
It doesn't exist by it.
But if you're leasing a car, then it's a rental.
Problem.
So if I own the car, I'm the bank. I own the car, and you lease a Tesla or lease a car that has Zara. So I mean, any car rental company, any lease. I don't own my Volvo. Somebody else owns my car. I pay my monthly payments. I don't own my car. Nothing at all. No one could take that from me if there was a lien on my property. So if I'm the bank and I'm a yid and I leased you my car, and now you're going to be Machal Shabbos, why is it any different than the animal? It should be an Isser Derabanan to sell. Again, I'm not a posek. I'm just saying to show. It seems from the Gemara that you can't sell something to an akum, to a guy who will be Machal Shabbos with that thing. I never want to be a posek. Says the Gemara, Rav Ada shar lizvune chamra ida de safsira. This is really clever. And this was a little bit, David, you almost hinted to this. He allowed selling a donkey via a safsira, via a middleman. Mishum nisyoni. If you want to say we're concerned about the test drive, and that would be the isser to sell, that doesn't apply here. Why? Because the animal doesn't know the middleman's voice. He doesn't know the middleman's voice in order to say that he's going to follow the middleman's voice. And if the middleman was trying to lend or trying to rent this out, well, kevan de lo didehu, since he really doesn't own it, he's just a middleman. He's getting a management fee. Lo moshav lo mogar. He's not motivated to rent or to lend it out. He's not the owner. At most, he's a shliach. He's a hired hand. Let's say I own the car, and I say, Stan, please go sell my car. So you lending it to somebody else helps you zero. So the safsira, this middleman, is not motivated to rent, and he's not motivated, again, the Gemara's assumption, he's not motivated to rent or to lend. He's only motivated to sell. So therefore, no problem. And that's why the Gemara says that if the person doing the actual sell is a safsira, he's a middleman, that's mutter. Another reason why he would not want to give an animal, why the safsira would not want to lend out or rent out, is because mishum delo nigli be'muma. When you're renting, If somebody's renting, when you go rent a car, they make you walk around the car and mark all the dents, and they have that little, quarter size hole. If the hole is smaller than that, you don't have the little dings. You don't have to worry about it. So the Gemara says there's another reason why the safsir would be unmotivated to lend or to rent, and that is finding mumim. Next case, 3 lines from the bottom. Rav Huna zavin ha'u para le'oved kochavim. This sounds usher. He sold a cow. What kind of animal is a cow? That is a behema gasa, and he sold it to an akum. Amar le Rav Chizda, my taima avad marhachi. Why would you do that? So Amar le Rav Huna said it was mutter for me to sell it to him because amor l'shchita zavna. Rashi says, and this is an important language for what we're doing. Rashi says, amor l'shchita zavna vitalinon lekula. What does that mean? It means that it could be that it's for that purpose. It also could not be that it's for that purpose. A tliya is when I could have assumed one way or the other, and I'm going to be tola lekula. We have these things, a tliya b'maka. This comes up in Hilchos Nida if a woman is constantly seeing bleeding, but it doesn't make sense that there should be bleeding, so then we're tola b'maka. If the kesem is less than a gris, we're tola b'maka. We're told on a bug that is very uncommon. We are very clean people. We don't have bugs for the most part crawling all over our bodies, but we halachically assume talin on the kula. And here, and I'll just say wildly so, when it comes to Avodah Zara, Rav Huna seems to have no problem saying, yeah, but it also could be that they're going to shech the animal. So he sells a para to the akum. Mechatesi, how is that allowed? Says the Gemara, turning to the top of Tes Vavim base, Uminat Timra de Amrina and Ki Hagabna. Mechatesi, Rashi says, Uminat Timra de Hecha de Ika lemisle b'mechira de lifnei iver talina lekula. We're talking about an Isser de Oraisa of lifnei iver lo siten nichshol. If I sell you a para and you do malacha on Shabbos, that's a big problem. Or in this case, if I sell you a para and you're about to do avodas kochavim with it, I'm going to be tola lekula that you wanted to be shechting the animal and have breakfast. That's a big kula. So says the Gemara, what's the precedent for that? And the Gemara responds ditnan. We'll see in the Shita of Beis Hillel that there is precedence for this. Beis Shammai omrim lo yimkor adam para hachoreshes shviz. He says that you are not allowed to sell a para, and Rashi adds in some detail here. Rashi says, Lo yimkor lo para hachoreshes b'shviz, Yisrael hachashid al hashviz. Lo yimkor lo chaveiro. If you're chashid al hashviz as a yid, then no one should sell you this animal b'shviz. Ubeis Hillel matirin mipnei sheyochel l'shochta. He says, no, it's mutter to sell that para during shviz because maybe afal pi that stands chashid al hashviz, but maybe he just wants to shecht it for his annual, his annual shchita and to have meat for the year. So we do see precedents. We see that in the world of shvius, even when the yid is chashid ala shvius, if I'm selling you a para, that's a behema gasa, we allow for that sale because it could just be that he's going to just shecht it and have breakfast. No problem. So says the Gemara, mi dami? Are you comparing the case of Shabbos to the case of shvius? Hasam, in the case of shvius, ein adam mitzuva al shvisas behemto b'shvius. There is no din by shvius of shvisas behemto. Mash'ein kein hacha by hilchos Shabbos adam mitzuva al shvisas behemto b'shvius. Apples and oranges. These are not the same cases. So says the Gemara, inquisitively, Amar le Abaye, b'chol hecha da adam mitzuva aser. Is it true that in every case where a person is mitzuva on shvisas behemto that it's aser? I'll give you an example where it's not like that. 7-8 lines down, Tes Vavim Beis. V'arei sadeh da adam mitzuva al shvisas sadehu b'shvis. When it comes to a sadeh, a person taka is mitzuva on the shvisa of their field, not of animals. But if I own a field during shvis, that's Karen shvis. We supported that in our shul massively. So says the Gemara here, but when it comes to the din of shvisa sadehu in shvis, that's a real thing. Vitanya, at least that's what it should say. Beis Shammai omrim lo yimkor adam sadanir b'shvis. You're not allowed to sell a plowed field in shvis. And look at Beis Hillel, matirin b'bnei sheyachol lehovira. We say, even though it's true, you are going to be mitzuva al shvisas sadehu, Beis Hillel is still matir to sell that field because Shema perhaps mipnei sheyachol lehovira. Maybe the buyer won't do anything with the field. So says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Maskif la Rav Ashi, v'cholecha de'ein adam mitzuvah shari. Is the opposite true, that whenever a person isn't mitzuvah, let's say by Shvius, we know that he was einu mitzuvah, would we always say that it's shari? That's not true either. V'harei kelim, when it comes to the utensils that a person uses for the field, there is no din of shvisas kelim. We have that by Shabbos. We don't have that by Shvius. And nevertheless, v'tznan, elu kelim she'ein adam rashai lemochrim b'shvius. There is no din of shvisas kelim by Shvius. So we would have thought that because you're not mitzuvah and shvisas kelim, it should be mutter to sell the kelim. Says the Brisa, no. You're not allowed to sell macharish as a plow, b'chol keleha, and all of its connected instruments. Ha'ol, the yoke, v'hamazre v'hadeker. This is some type of shovel and some type of hoe, these types of gardening tools. So what do we see from here? That you are not mitzuvah and shvisas kelim, but nevertheless, you seem to be usher to sell them. So really, we've seen proofs in both directions that the rules aren't clear. If you're mitzuvah, does that mean that you can't sell? If you're eina mitzuvah, does that mean that you can? And we've crisscrossed and we've shown that it's not clear. So the Gemara lays down the law finally and conclusively in regards to this case. And the Gemara says a quarter of the way down on Tesvav Amud Beis, Hela Amar Rav Ashi, Kol heicha de'ika lemisla talinan. Wherever we're able to be tola, we are ve'afal gav de mitzuvah. Meaning, even in a case where I have shvisas behemto, it's usher for you to use my animal while I still own it on Shabbos. Nevertheless, even though it's a case that's mitzvah, because I can be tole, I will. So the akum comes up, he says, I'd like to buy an animal for shchita. So it could be that he's lying, but we can be tole lekula, even though we're mitzvah and shvisas behemto, that's mutter. However, but if there isn't a reasonable path to be tola lekula, then we won't. And that's afal gav de einu mitzvah, like by the kelim of shvis. There, it's einu mitzvah. There's no din of shvisas kelim by shvis, and we're still not going to be mekel because what else are you using gardening tools for during shvis? There is no other option. This is what the tools are used for. Masha'en came when it comes to a para. I was at somebody's house 3 months ago, and I told you the story. They paid me with the money that they sold their cow with that same morning. They brought their cow to wherever, shot it in the head, and gave me the cash, and that's how they paid for the circumcision that I did. I'm like, this is literally blood money for a cow. But I took it. I wasn't like hesitant about it.
You didn't have a cow about it.
No, that was like a Michael joke. No?
Same table.
Same table. Yeah. You guys can't sit next to each other again. I'm going to be the classroom teacher. You guys need to separate. You need to separate. So says the Gemara a third of the way down. Let's talk about more cases. Rabba zavin hahu chamra leYisrael hachashad limkor leOved kol chavim. Rabba sold a donkey and he sold it to a yid, and the yid was chashad limkor leAvodas kol chavim. He'd been branded, so he was the kind of person who would sell a donkey to an avodas kol chavim. Amar le'abai, my taima avad mar hachi. Why would you do that? You sold something to a Yisrael who's chashud to sell to an oved kol chavim. So says the Gemara, Amar le, Rabba defends himself. Ana leYisrael's vini. I sold it to a Jew. No problem. Amar le, va'azilu mazman le oved kol chavim. I know you did, but he's chashud to sell to an oved kol chavim. And Rabba's like, lo oved kol chavim kam azmin, but leYisrael lo kam azmin. The only people to sell to are Ovdei Kochavim. I have to worry. We said this yesterday. We're concerned about Lifnei, but not Lifnei the Lifnei. So you're right. It could be that an Akum would buy it, but it also could be that a Yid would buy it. It's not like this guy only sells to Akum. He's Chashud, I agree, but he has a fork in the road. Oh, Cantor wants to buy, no problem, I'll sell to him. Okay, Ovdei Kochavim wants to buy, I'll sell to him. So the Gemara says, it's a great argument. It's chashud, but it's not like one. It's not like a cul-de-sac where there's only one road. He can go the other way. He could sell to Yisrael too. So now let's question this. We're going to soon see that Rabbah will regret his psak, which is rare. The Gemara says almost halfway down Esvei, we have a quote from a brisa. Makom shenahagu limkor behemadaka likusim mochrin. We know that kusim were gerei ariyosem. They converted because of the fear of lions. It was not l'shem shamayim. Really, we don't really accept those kinds of conversions generally when they're done out of coercion. So while that's true, they're also not equivalent to an akum. They have a little bit of a better status than an akum. So what does the brisa say? That makom shenagu limkor behema daka lekusim, that in a city where it's permissible to sell behema daka to kusim, mochrin. Shelo limkor ein mochrin. It depends on the city. And therefore, in some cases, kusim can be sold to, in some cases not. My taima. What is the reason why we would say that you're not allowed to? If you want to say that the reason the brisa says shelo limkor ein mochrin is because a kusi is chashid al haravia, we're afraid that they'll be involved in inappropriate activities with the animals. That's not correct. We're actually not choshesh in regards to a kusi about this. Why not? V'atanya, a very somewhat lengthy brisa. First, let's talk about the akum. V'atanya, we have a brisa. It's a tosefta here in this masechta in a later parak. Ein ma'amidin behema bepundako shel ovdei kochavim. You're not allowed to leave a behema in an inn of ovdei kochavim. We're concerned about revia. Zecharim etzel zecharim is problematic. V'nekevos etzel nekevos is also problematic. Now, even though the nekeva animal can't cohabit with a nekeva woman, but nevertheless, we are concerned because the men at that time were very promiscuous, as were the women. So a man may go to a woman's room and try to cohabit with her, and if the female animal is outside, he may be tempted by that as well. This is not something that we understand in our culture, but that was one of the things that was going on at that time. So says the Gemara, Zecharim etzel zecharim v'nekevos etzel nekevos. Ve'in tzarech lomar nekevos etzel zecharim zecharim etzel nepashat. That if they were opposite gendered animal to people, pasha, we're concerned about that. That means in both directions. We're concerned about a male sodomizing a female animal, and we're concerned about a female human allowing herself to be sodomized by an animal, or whatever, to have intercourse with an animal. And ve'ein mosrin behema l'roa shelahen. We don't give over our animals to be watched by their shepherds because of the same concern of chashide arivia. Ve'im yachden iman. We can't be alone with them because we're afraid that they might kill us. Ve'ein mosrin lahem tinok lalamdo sefer ulalamdo umnos. We don't give over our children to learn in their institutions. Aval. But when it comes to a kusi, the rules are different. All of this was by a regular akum. Aval ma'amidin behema b'pundakos shel kusim. We do allow for an animal to be placed in an inn that belongs to a kusi. Namely, we are not chashud al harivia. Zecharim etzel nekevos v'nekevos etzel zecharim. Even opposite gendered animals could be with their opposite gendered owners. Ve'in tzarech lomar zecharim etzel zecharim v'nekevos etzel nekevos pasha. That's mutter by a kusi. Umosrim behema l'rosh elem. We're not choshesh about their shepherds that they're inappropriate. Umiyachden iman. We're not concerned that the kusim will kill us. Umosrim lem tinok lalamdo sefer v'lalamdo umnes. If the person's a kusi, we would allow them to teach our children. Alma lo chashidi. What we see from here, from this brisa, is that we are not choshesh. Ve'od, and furthermore, Tanya, we have another brisa. This is also in the Tosefta, in the next parak. Ein mochrin lahem, in regards to an oved kochavim. What do we not sell to an akum? Lo zayin, not weapons. Below clay zayin, other kinds of weapons. They're just different types of tools. Rashi here details them. Rashi says lo zayin is sayif v'romach, a sword and a spear. Clay zayin, beis yad l'romach, the nadan l'say. These are the handles to and the sheaths of those weapons. The clay zayin are not the actual instruments themselves. They're the gear for those instruments. Vein mashchizan lehem es hazayin. We're not allowed to sharpen their swords. Vein mochrin lehem. We do not sell them. You know, like when we see these movies of knights, they'll be wearing these like metal chain hoods so that the swords can't kill them. So that's what this is. Lo sadan velo kolarin velo kivalim velo shal shalo shal barzel. Different versions of that cover different body parts of metal. And look at this line. Echad oved kochavim ve'echad kusi. This applies everywhere. My taima, says the Gemara. Ine ma dechshiri ashvichus damim. If you want to say that the kusim are chashid al shvichus damim umichshidi ve'amr sum yachadim lehem, we already said that it's mutter for a yid to be alone with the kusi because we're not concerned that they're going to kill. So that shows us. Now we've learned a second thing about a kusi. The first thing we learned is that they're not chashid arivia because we allow us to have animals be alone with them, and they're also not chashid ashvichus damim because we are allowed to be alone with them with a kusi. Ella, says the Gemara, mishum de'asi lizvuna le'ovdei kochavim. Rather, what must our concern be about a kusi when it says shelo limkor a little bit above? Why did we say in regards to a kusi that we're concerned about him? It must be de'asi lizvuna le'ovdei kochavim. And what does that show you? If you're concerned about a kusi who's going to sell to an oved kochavim, you should also be concerned about a yid who sells to an oved kochavim. So Rabbah wanted to say, well, why? He could sell to anyone. The Brisa doesn't show that concern. The Brisa doesn't show that kula of talin and lekula. What we see is that a kusi is worried. We are worried that a kusi will sell to an akum. So, and there's no talin and lekula. So that's a big kasha on Rabbah. And v'chitema kusi lo avid tshuva, but Yisrael avid tshuva. Maybe a yid is different than a kusi. Maybe a kusi can't do tshuva, and maybe he'll sell it no matter what, and that's why we're more choshesh for a kusi than we are for Yisrael. But a Yisrael is avid tshuva, and maybe by Yisrael, Rabba Svara would apply that, yeah, but we can be talin and lekula because maybe he'll only sell to the correct person. Says the Gemara, no. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua, Kederach she'amru aser limkor le'oved kochavim, kach aser limkor liYisrael achashud limkor le'oved kochavim. Black on white, you're not allowed to do that. So Rabbah's been disproven. You don't see this very often like this, right? Rabbah's been disproven.
That's son. My son.
Mm-hmm.
Which mice are you seeing?
He did it. He didn't just paskin, right?
He paskined. What do you mean? Rabbah's shita is a third of the way down. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a story. He paskined. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I got you. Yeah. I misunderstood what you were saying. I thought you were saying one of the rayas was a story because that's true. We have that in halacha too. That a maisa is yeah. That's what I thought you were saying. Correct. And in fact, look what the Gemara says that Rabbah did. He's like, I gave out the wrong psak. What am I supposed to do? The Gemara says, Rahit basrei tlasa parsi. He chased after the guy for 3 parsi. Vikad amre parsa bechala. He ran in sand, which is not a pashat azach. The lo adrache. He wasn't able to catch up to that person. And that's what he said. He mamish made a mistake. He was disproven, and he took ownership. And yeah. We're going to have to stop here at Amar of Dimi because the next section ends at the 2 dots and we won't finish in time. I'll tell Rabbi, I'll be teaching this on Shabbos. And on Shabbos, we'll have to make up a lot of ground. Yirtzeh Hashem. And looking forward to learning with you then. Wishing you all a beautiful night.